Hello, and thank you for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. This show is brought to you by Flatirons Tuning, your source for any aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts. Be sure to check out our store at flatironstuning.com and stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. All right, well, let's dive into it. Welcome back, everybody. This is episode number 79 of the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast, and we've got Scotty joining us today, Dussex from his top secret location. And we've got another guest sitting in with us today. We've got Tony from Turning Concepts. And Tony, thanks very much for making the time to chat with us here. Really appreciate that.
No problem.
And the reason I wanted to reach out is, we've been kind of had some talks behind the scenes here in the shop just about building race cars and some of the issues that come up when you take a Subaru that is designed for the street and then you start running it on track, making more power, getting it hot. There's all sorts of things that can come up. And what we realized is that Turning Concepts, you guys have got a lot of experience building race cars and building Subaru race cars. And so thought it might be a good conversation to have just with you guys to talk about what all is involved, like maybe even why you would even start with the Subaru to turn it into a race car in the first place, and then some of the common problems that you run into or common considerations you'd want to have to turn that car into a race car, that sort of thing.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, obviously tons and tons of considerations for any race car. But I think especially with the Subaru, there's a lot of additional considerations that really have to be made in order to make sure that you make it as reliable as possible. We got into building Subaru race cars. It really started off with autocross cars back in like 2004. That's really when we got our start with Subarus. And then 2009 is when we did the first One Lap of America event. And that's what really got us started into time trial and getting us really excited about what you could do with a Subaru on track. And just from the time attack aspect, how much fun it was to actually get out there in one of these cars. And then how surprised people were when you showed up with at the time, like a stock looking 2004 WRX and, was able to beat GTRs and Corvettes and all kinds of really, really fast cars that people thought were shoo-ins for an event like a time trial event.
Sure.
Just kept going from there. So it's been fun.
Maybe, as a start, how did you guys start working with Subarus? Like I have a guess, but I just wanted to see what you guys would say.
I was right out of college. I ended up picking up a 2004 WRX. That was my first Subaru. I've been into like all-wheel drive turbo cars for a while, going back into DSMs. And as a result of graduating college, I wanted to get another, all-wheel drive turbo car. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife at the time, said I was not allowed to ever own another DSM. So Subaru was like the next
wise words,
choice, and I still have not had one to this day. I think the only way I'd get a divorce is if I showed up with a DSM. I'd be out instantly.
Oh man.
But that's kind of how I got started into Subarus. And then I met Clint, who you've had on here before. My business partner. Shortly thereafter, I think we met in 2003, I believe, late 2003. He had an 04 STI, and we both met at an autocross event and started hanging out a lot, started working on the cars that we had, and then shortly thereafter started designing parts to sell to the market. We didn't really start working on cars until 2010 or so. Before that, it was really just all coming up with new ideas for parts, selling parts online.
Sure.
It wasn't until the time attack stuff started to take off, it started to really become popular, that we actually started working on customers' cars. That was really the impetus for the start of the quote unquote shop, and really starting the service side of what we do. And now that is the biggest part of what we do is our service business. Our race prep that we do here in the shop for customers all over the country, our build process for cars for customers all over the country, and then as well for our local customers, building engines, building transmissions, doing a lot of dyno tuning, electronics packages.
Sure.
That's become now our main focus business.
Very cool. Well, and I'm guessing that part of the appeal of the Subaru, one, it's a platform that you guys knew. Like I said, it was an all-wheel drive platform, but kind of as you alluded to, like when you figure out some of the, let's call them eccentricities of the platform, and you get the car set up, then that's where all of a sudden, like I said, I mean, it has a lot of potential and it can definitely hit above its weight and surprise people.
Yeah.
But
It's also a lot of fun too, because I think, back in the day, the owners were very techie minded people. So they loved diving into the specifics of power and cooling systems and brakes and suspension. I mean, they really liked knowing all the little details about all of these different items.
yeah,
And it's still alive today. I mean, obviously, the Subaru market has grown like crazy, and it's loved by a much wider variety of people than ever before. But it's still greatly alive in track groups all across the internet and all across the country and the world. These guys still love that kind of stuff. They still love the technical details and really being part of learning what these cars are, and kind of playing that underdog role. And you can go out and get a Corvette, and I mean that's always the easy answer. If you want a fast car, get a Corvette or a 911, and it's going to be reliable and easy. And there's a formula for that stuff. Not so with a Subaru. In order to make something super fast, and that's where ingenuity and research and development, and a lot of really smart people coming up with really cool ideas, bring the cars to life and keep them out there.
Now, Tony, do you think that if you had to do it all over again, do you think the Subaru is the correct platform to start out with to build a race car?
Depends what you want. I mean, I don't personally own any Subarus, and yet I have a lot of race cars. So I guess we're most known for the time attack stuff that we do and the time attack Subarus that we build. But I build race cars for other people that are not time attack. I build sprint race cars for people. I build endurance race cars for people. I do a lot of endurance racing myself, mostly in BMWs and Miatas. I have multiple Miatas. I'm in the process of getting a Porsche right now for endurance racing. I mean, for me, it's kind of whatever is fun to drive and whatever people have some kind of passion for is what I want to be involved in, especially with working with the customers, because that is exciting to me. It's exciting for me to be able to use my knowledge and to use the connections and the resources I have to be able to bring these projects to life for people. Because that's, ultimately you go to the track, you want to have a good time. You want to have fun. You want to see other people having fun. And I like to be a part of it. So I think a Subaru still is a great platform. There are other great platforms as well, but if you're dedicated to Subaru, it definitely is still a good one to build. May cost you a little bit more. The road may be a little bit rockier than picking a Corvette or a 911.
Absolutely.
And I have those conversations with people to say, this is what you can expect if you're going to try to build a Subaru race car versus starting with one of these other cars. You may have, a higher upfront cost to do a Corvette or a 911. But you're probably going to spend, the same amount in the long run to get an equally fast car. But some people love Subarus,
Sure.
I work with a lot of customers that bought their cars brand new and have had them for over a decade and are still building those cars because they fell in love with the car when it was new, and they still love it to this day, and they still want to continue to develop it.
Right. Well, and I mean, let's talk about some of those considerations, because I think that like if people have had their car for 5, 7, 10 years and they're wanting to get really serious about tracking the car, like that's one of the things that we've run into to a certain degree too, is that like oftentimes, at least from our vantage point, I think people really there's a real tendency, I think, for people to just go and think immediately to power and think about engine build and power if they're setting out to build this race car. But like a lot of times with Subarus, there's a lot of other things you want to think about, not just power, and it ends up being all related to that. But so I'm curious just what some of the key considerations you think are if you wanted to take a Subaru and turn it into a race car.
Well, so I think the way that I always approach this with any of my customers here at the shop, or any of the people that I'm talking to, goes back to kind of my undergrad in sales and professional sales. I mean, I have a undergrad degree in professional sales. And it really comes down to understanding your customers and understanding their goals. What is it that you ultimately want to do with your car on track? Do you want to go out and compete at the top levels of time attack regionally across the country? Are you looking to build a car to go to world time attack, and compete with those guys? Or do you just want to go out and have fun and do track days? Are you trying to build an endurance car, a sprint race car? Understanding that sets the direction for the car and what needs to be done to it. If you don't have the proper goals set for where you're going to end up, then you're just aimlessly building, and that's never going to go well. So in a case like Mike Amick, so in his car, when he started working with us about 3 years ago, I sat down with Mike and I said, Mike, what do you want to do? What are your goals in building this car? And he said that he wants to win this specific street modified class in grid life. He said he loved competing in grid life. He thought it was a really, really fun event. He had a lot of friends that were running grid life. And he said, I want to win the street modified class. I don't have plans to go on from that class. I want to develop the car to be to the limit of the class and to be the fastest in the class. And I said, great. With that in mind, we know that there's a power target that we're going to have to hit. We know that with that power target is going to come cooling problems, and we're going to have to be able to remedy those. And then we know that with that power that we're going to, incur certain grip issues, because of the sheer amount of speed that the car is going to be capable of. So we'll need to develop an aero and suspension package to go along with that power. And that's really what it comes down to is really understanding that. If now the person just says, I want to go out and just be reliable and have fun doing track days, well, I'm going to approach that completely differently, because then it's not about, who am I going to beat at my track day? The question is, am I going to have the most amount of fun possible at my track day? And generally speaking, and the customers I've worked with over the years, that all comes down to reliability, because they want to go to the track and they don't want to have to worry about random stupid issues that are going to come up. They just want to go drive. They want to spend their money on driving, not spend their money on towing a car to the track to then break down to then tow it home and essentially waste that entry fee, waste the hotel and the gas and everything else. So then I may say, keep it stock turbo. Let's focus on cooling mods. Let's run it on a proper fuel that's not going to have issues when you start to compound a bunch of heat, after a 30-minute session. And let's just keep the car reliable and simple. And we have lots of customers that we build cars like that for, that are, stock turbo, like a stage 2, quote unquote, level of power, that are just overbuilt from a suspension and cooling system perspective. And they're great, and they have no problems with them, and they're not blowing ring lines out, and they're not burning up valves, and the head gaskets are doing just fine, and they're all unopened, completely factory sealed motors, and they're still going great after years of abuse.
It sounds like you're describing Scotty here that way.
Knowing the goal is the most important thing. If you don't have the goal set to where you want to be with your car, then you're just going to fail. I mean, you have no direction.
Yeah, and I think with people, if people are looking at getting into racing, I mean, knowing kind of where you want to compete or where you want to go, I mean, that's just so important for all those reasons that you underlined.
Yep.
And it's one of those things where, like, if you're not sure, then that's where going out and spectating, maybe supporting, volunteering with the team or two, and trying to just like get involved in the events and see what the makeup is, what the flow of the events are, make sure that it's something you enjoy. Completely. And then once you know that, then once you've got that rule set to build to, then you've got a really good foundation to work with, versus just kind of thinking, well, yeah, like, I want to build a track car, so I probably need like 600 horsepower. So let's just start there, and then all the other pieces will fall into place. Doesn't usually work that way.
No, I had a good conversation yesterday actually with a good customer of mine who just got a GT4, and we were planning out the build process for the GT4, and he was getting ready to do his first track day. So we were just doing some pads and fluid just to get him ready for that. And he asked me about time attack. He's like, "What do you know about time attack?" I'm like, "Well, I know a lot about time attack." I'm like, "Are you considering doing time attack?" He's like, "Well, yeah, somebody told me about NASA, so I think I'm going to do NASA and get into NASA time attack." I'm like, "Well, have you looked at the other, time trial events that are out there, the other groups that run it?" He's like, "No, I haven't." I'm like, "That's where you need to start. If time trial and time attack is something you think you want to do, go to a NASA event and a CCA event, go to a grid life event, find all the other events that are around you, that you think will meet your geographic, concerns, and go to each one and see what it's like. Because you may think that somebody has told you to go do a NASA event. You may go to a NASA event and say, that's not really what I want. And maybe you'll go to an SCCA event and actually really like an SCCA event versus something else. But until you go and experience them, I mean, you're ultimately not going to know, which one is going to best suit you. This he's in his probably early 50s, and being in early 50s, maybe a grid life event is not really, his cup of tea,
Right.
A little different than some other ones. But until you go and experience them, you don't know. And
Right.
so that's what I try to help people with that, again, trying to set those goals, try to set expectations, and then trying to get them the kind of experience so that they understand what's out there for them.
Yeah. And I think one of the aspects, I mean, just to build on that is kind of overlooked is what the environment is like with the other competitors and in the paddock.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the things we've had conversations with a lot of people, and it seems to be pretty consistent with time attack specifically, is that there's a reasonable amount of camaraderie in the paddock between other competitors, and not always, but there seems to be a lot of that there. Rally, for instance, that's one of the things where, like, I think a lot of people that get into rally racing, there's a heck of a lot of camaraderie and support in all the teams in the paddock, and for some people, it's that feeling of like what it's like to be there at the event with all these other teams that's the real draw, versus like wheel to wheel tends to be more competitive, and there's a lot more rivalry or tendency towards rivalry there, where like some people, they definitely want to be the fastest, but then like you don't have that camaraderie necessarily on the weekends. And so like just the environment in the pits might be something that you're looking for, that you like, or that is not kind of what you're looking for.
Yeah, which is why I think a lot of people end up liking grid life events, because it's very competitive on the track. It's incredibly competitive. If you're doing time attack or you're doing GLTC, whatever the case may be. Some of the most competitive racing that I've done that is of that form. But once you get back in the paddock, everyone's willing to help out. Everyone's willing to lend a hand. Oh, you need a part? I think I've got one of those parts, or I know a guy in town that's got that part. Let me go get it for you. And that's one of the great things about the organization, is they've been able to foster the competition, but also foster the friendships that exist.
Right.
So I've gained a whole group of friends from grid life, from all over the country, and we hang out all the time. We go to events together. We paddock together, and now there's 10 of us that are all bringing our cars and doing the events, and we talk nonstop all day long about what we're doing next for the next event and how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
And it's a big part of what keeps me going back to the events, is the friends that I've made. And it's important to know that, and that's why it's important to experience different events to know where you fit in.
For sure. Well, so let's talk about maybe some more of the nuts and bolts considerations. You mentioned cooling, and one of the things I wonder is if, like, you would say that some of the issues with Subarus, the things to consider, well, cooling certainly, but like power potential. I mean, if you're starting with an engine that starts off with just 4 cylinders, and you want to raise the power level above a certain mark, that's where the challenge comes in, because you have a less number of cylinders, relatively small displacement. And so like if you want to make 500 horsepower out of a 2.5 liter engine, that's a fairly reasonably high amount of power out of a relatively small amount of displacement. And if you want to make more than that, even more so.
Right. Yeah. And it's, I have one of my race cars, I've got an endurance, it's a 350Z with an LS3 drivetrain in it. And it makes 500 wheel horsepower, and we endurance race that. Haven't in a few years at this point, but, did for a few years. And yeah, I mean, 6.2 liters, 500 wheel horsepower, running it for 8 hours at a time.
Right.
It didn't care. It was fine. It generated a ton of heat, and we had, 3 oil coolers that were on the thing in order to keep it cool, and a crazy radiator and ducting and everything else. But it worked fine. I've also endurance raced Subarus, and good Lord, that is way harder to do. Trying to shed the heat, trying to make power out of a very small engine, relatively speaking, and still put it into what is kind of a heavy car. That's tough, and that was the first endurance race that we ever did, was in a Subaru out in California, 25 hours to Thunderhill back in 2010.
Okay.
And that was an eye-opening experience. We learned a whole lot about building a car for endurance, building a race car, specifically, around a Subaru and all the things that could go wrong.
Sure.
Almost completely melted the car down with a fire, learned from that.
Sure.
And ultimately ended up, doing pretty well. Turned good lap times, turned 18 hours of laps out there in the car. But yeah, I mean, it comes down to the experience and really learning kind of, what you need to do. So yeah, I mean, if you're going to try to make, I'll use Mike's car as an example. Mike Amick's car that runs in Grid Life. It's just kind of a real good case study for this kind of stuff. So his car currently makes about 650 horsepower at the wheels. When we're looking at these things, we know, again, that we need a power target somewhere between 650 and 800 to compete in this class. We've got some upgrades coming that's actually going to push us up to the 8 to 850 mark on that car. But currently at 650, we know that it's going to generate a whole lot of heat. And we know that we need to shed that heat in the most efficient way possible, in a way that keeps the package cool, but also in a way that maybe helps aero. That it's not just trying to dump hot air all over the place, but it's trying to dump hot air specifically that will help the overall performance of the car. And then, so we know that we're going to generate power, that generating power is going to generate heat. We need to get rid of that heat. But then we also know that when a driver is out there and he is trying to turn the fastest possible lap he can in a car that is really designed to go really, really stupid fast, he can't be sitting there looking at lights and gauges and everything else, because he needs to be focused on every last, hundredth of a second or thousandth of a second that he can gain in a lap in order to get the absolute fastest time. So then we work on the electronics side of things in order to safeguard the drivetrain as much as we can, so that we don't have to have the driver be the one that is interpreting values and interpreting the safety of the engine at that point. We let the electronics package do that for him. So then all he needs to do is go out and turn his lap. I say all, like, that's a super easy thing to do. It's obviously still very, very difficult, but we leave the mechanicals out of it. And I try to have the driver just focus on the driving.
Sure.
And in Mike's car, in that specific situation, has been very successful. So in order to develop a cooling package, one of the most important things you need, no matter what coolers you're using, no matter how many, no matter what size they are, really almost more important than any of that is proper airflow through those coolers. You can have the biggest radiator in the world on the front of a car, and then you don't duct it, and then air just rushes right around the radiator, never goes through it, and doesn't cool the thing off.
Right.
So in Mike's car, we took that approach and we said, all right, we worked with Spade Sport in Canada in order to have them make a hood for us that would allow us to vent all of that incoming air to the front straight up and over the car, because we wanted to control that airflow as best we could. And then I worked with our fabricator here in order to fabricate a front end that would take all of that air that was coming into the car, funnel it through the intercooler, funnel it through the radiator, and then point it upwards and go up and out the hood with it. Okay. And we used to have lots of overheating issues with that car when we were running a more standard, just a standard like vertical intercooler and a standard vertical radiator. And without even changing the radiator, we actually just modified, it was a standard Koyo, aftermarket radiator. Without even changing the radiator, just modifying it in order to tip it forward and then duct it properly, keeping the same intercooler and everything in there. We saw a 30-degree drop in coolant temps just by having proper ducting and proper airflow through those cores. And it used to be that we would go out there for 2 laps and we'd be seeing 235-degree, 240-degree water temps, through the engine management system. We can now go out at 650 horsepower. We were just doing this 2 weeks ago. We can go out at 650 horsepower and we could turn 7 laps, 8 laps before we get to that point in temperature again. And most of the time when we're out there from a time attack perspective, we're focusing on 1 or 2 laps at a time, and that's it. So now, where we used to see 235-degree water temp, 240, now we're seeing, 205. And that's really as hot as it ever gets now. And that was really all just through proper airflow management, proper ducting, really controlling that airflow as it comes into the car. Which then obviously had, great effects to the aero efficiency of the car, the amount of downforce that we could create, because we were then shooting that air up and over the top of the car, as opposed to shooting that air down and under the car, creating a lot of turbulence and lift.
Right.
So I mean, from a nuts and bolts perspective, and actually looking at how you make this stuff work, again, it's a normal coil radiator that you can buy for $300 from anywhere. It's not a custom crazy radiator. I mean, it is an off-the-shelf unit, just properly ducted.
It's with radiators. We've run into this ourselves a bit in one of our race cars, but it's the radiator is just as important as the ducting. And like you say, almost the ducting is more important than the radiator. But the ducting and like the thought of the air as it goes into the radiator, how the air comes out of the radiator, because that doesn't come with the radiator itself, that's often something that people overlook. Right. And it's like what we ran into, or one of the first things we realized is when you're taking a Subaru and you're turning it into a race car and it came with air conditioning, and you remove the AC condenser that sits in front of the radiator.
Yep.
What you forget, or it's easy to forget, is that AC condenser has
foam pieces.
It's these little foam pieces that help duct that air through the radiator, and you take that out, and all of a sudden there's this big gap, and that's not doing any favors.
We see it all the time. And really, I mean, there's a huge trend, the whole built not bought sort of trend online, which is fantastic, because I'm obviously a DIYer at heart, and I still am in everything that I do. And I want people to get involved and get their hands dirty and build cars. But I think what gets lost sometimes is there is still an art to the experience in knowing how to do these more advanced, higher level things. That's really kind of what comes down to, the professional side of it, is knowing those things, knowing that you can't remove an AC condenser, remove the blocking, and that radiator that you just bought is going to work great. Knowing that you have to have a solution to duct that air. That's really where that professional viewpoint comes in. It can really help people succeed in their modding.
Right. Well, in Dussex, I want to pull you in because you've been awful quiet over there.
Yeah, I probably the least favorable questions, but I want to start off with like the 850 horsepower, 650 horsepower. Yeah. That is just like so cringy to me. I know you guys sell parts. I know you guys build cars and stuff, but at what point do you guys ever working on your drivers to actually find speed in their own car beyond horsepower? Because I look at the times that Mike put down at NCM, and knowing now that it's 650 horsepower, it's kind of I think probably a little room for advancement. And I just feel like 850 horsepower is not the message that I personally would want to send, and I know Scott.
That's a really interesting point. And I want to say this as in as friendly a way as I can, when it comes to Mike, because I love Mike and I've been working with him for a long time. Mike is a fantastic guy. He's a good driver. He loves modifying his car. He will also admit that there are other people that could probably get in there and drive faster than he could at this point. But it's not, that car is not about that. That car is not about, putting a professional driver in him and have him go compete for the season. Again, it comes back to kind of the camaraderie that exists within that organization of Grid Life to say, this is my car, I'm doing what I can to build the car, and I want to go out and compete with you guys because you're my friends, and I want to go out and have fun with you guys and be part of that competition. Is he the fastest driver? No. I mean, could we pluck a Formula One driver in it, probably put him in that car and probably go faster? Sure. I'm sure that there was somebody that could go faster. But that's not what it's about. It's about me working with him to see his goals and his dreams come true. And I'm going to do that in any way that I have to. So to answer your question directly, I work with all of the drivers that I'm in charge of building cars for on their driving in order to get better. We have multiple sources of data that we pull, depending on the car, depending on the driver. In the case of Mike, he responds very well to using the Garmin Catalyst because it's a very visual, easy to understand reference point for how to drive faster after you set some laps. So he uses the catalyst, and then I also pull data on the back end from the Motec system that's in the car, so that I can look at what needs to happen from a car setup perspective, while he's using the catalyst in order to understand what has to happen from a driver perspective. And then we sit down after every session and we say, okay, look, like, here's where you could go a little bit faster in this corner, carry more speed. I mean, even if we're just working on lines, I mean, the catalyst is fantastic for being able to see if you're doing that right or wrong. So a lot of it comes down to
exists data that's being populated from his driving. So it's not like the catalyst says, here's the ideal line for this track. The catalyst looks at each lap that he does, in each sector and says, hey, you did this better in this sector than the time before. It doesn't necessarily, it's not quite the same as like, that's just been my experience, because I work with a lot of the SCCA and NASA time trial guys locally, try and find speed, especially the SCCA guys. And they've gotten to use the catalyst and stuff. And the catalyst is super cool. I mean, you hear people, they're talking in their ear, like communicate to you, do this, do that. But like when you look at some of the line suggestions, and a lot of it's all, from what I could tell, is all being populated from what they were doing. So if they were, say, always overslowing for a corner, it's going to tell you the one time that you overslowed the least, but it doesn't tell you, hey, you're way overslowing for the corner.
Yeah, and I think for time attack, the catalyst is not great at recommendations because you don't turn a lot of laps. Mm-hmm. So it's using a very limited data set to say this is your ultimate lap. I guess more what I was saying from a line perspective is the easy integration of video and data to be able to say, here is your corner speed when you took this line through the corner. This isn't use the catalyst for its built-in suggestions. It's we are reviewing the video and the data together to say, this is where I think you should be in the corner considering. Now, we also use the catalyst in one of my endurance Miatas. And if you want to talk about really, really interesting data, you then, at the end of the day, you look at 8 or 9 hours of catalyst data and have it show you what it thinks is the best lap, the best line, where you should be going on the track. That's some really interesting data. And actually, when you put that much into it, it actually gets pretty darn spot on. It's pretty neat. But for time attack, you can't really use it for that. You just have to use it for the video, and then use the kind of limited telemetry that you get out of it.
It is definitely instantaneous, and that's definitely pretty helpful. Definitely helpful when I'm talking with people, because they have so much information that they can look at and digest, and it's easier to say, hey, you should be doing this. I don't care what the catalyst says. That right there in that picture where you're going 67, you need to be there doing like 70. I would work on that. And then when you get back and you do it, I was like, cool, now be 73 there. Like, it's good for that, especially for people who are new to it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like we talk about, outside of when we host, RCE or you guys, or Roger Clark, or whoever, we talk and preach about seat time. And I just feel like, I don't know, there's not enough drivers out there getting seat time. So now I'm in this dilemma where, like, I love Peter Zhang. I absolutely love that guy. So I just want to get that out there. Hi, Peter. You're like, okay.
I'm sure he's going to watch.
Yeah, I love that guy. He's so cool. But, outside of that, I get that you talk to a shop and you talk about, because everyone wants to know what, the secret ingredient is about what makes a car fast. But shit, outside of this, talk about seat time all the time. I mean, Scott's car is not far off of my car, and I've got sometimes 100 more horsepower than him. Yep. So there's definitely a lot to be said about driving. So I was just curious, part of that special sauce or whatever is something that you guys consider. Because
so a lot of it is, and I guess what is important from a mechanical perspective is to get the car reliable enough so that you can go out and have seat time in it, right? So if you are trying to build, a 650, 800,000 wheel horsepower car that is just reliable enough to maybe get you 3/4 of a lap in at a time, it gets you no seat time. You never actually get to learn a whole lot about the car. Sure, you get to have a drag car that maybe, slowly goes around corners, but you're not going to learn how to drive it, right? So getting the mechanicals right and building the car correctly so that you can get out there and say, okay, now the car works. Now let's go and do test days that are not part of sanctioned events. So that's actually what we were doing 2 weeks ago. with Mike's car. We get it to the point where it actually is working well enough, and then we take it out and we go to Putnam and we start it's just seat time. So let's get out there. We're always using it from the technical side to revise the car and refine it and make it better. But from his perspective, he gets out there and just gets to drive.
Right.
And that's a great thing because he definitely needs it. And anybody who does enough driver coaching, I mean, Ryan, for sure, you know this, seat time is king. And if you're not out there turning lap after lap after lap after lap, even if it's not in your car, even if it's in a virtual setting, you've got a sim rig at home and you're turning lap after lap after lap on a sim rig. I mean, all those things are going to help teach you better car control, teach you how to be a better driver, so that when you do get in the pressure moments of having to actually now perform in an event, you're ready to go. That's something I've been working with Mike for a long time, is trying to get him into a sim rig. I've had a sim rig for a couple of years. We do a ton of practice. We've got an event, Champ Car race coming up at Watkins Glen this weekend. We'll get together with all the guys that are going to be driving the car. We'll do, group sim rig events so that, we'll sit there and practice. We'll talk about techniques. We'll talk about, where we want to be, how we want to approach different corners in traffic. We'll specifically set up traffic events, so that, they have to navigate offline so that they understand what it's like, because all that stuff is so incredibly important to do. And virtually, I mean, you can do that for a very low cost now compared to actually getting in a car and getting out on track. That's something that I've talked to Mike about as well, and I think it's something that can't be overlooked. No matter how good the car is, if the driver is not prepared, then the car is not going to turn good times. So.
Well, and one of the things like kind of to merge both of these together is making 650, making 850 horsepower in a Subaru that has a whole lot of requirements that, I'm sure that when you're talking to somebody, you're talking to Mike about setting either one of those targets. There's going to be some compromises that are made. There's going to be a lot of things that need to be done and considered to make it so that the car is reliable enough to get some amount of driving seat time in before you have to go in and check things, service things, tear the engine down and so forth. But to somebody that's coming in with a Subaru, I think that's one of the key pieces that is missed. And so again, starting from a power perspective without a good foundation to base it on, you could build power, then all of a sudden the reliability just isn't there, and then you can't get the seat time. So you can't develop as a driver, and you're always chasing mechanical issues on the car. And then it's just at some point, it's that's where frustration could really set in, certainly, to say the least.
I agree, and that's something that took us a long time to develop on these cars in terms of making the engines reliable enough to be able to withstand that kind of power. I mean, I look back to, we did the one lap of America again in 2011 in our old car that we had, the silver time attack car, and had lots of reliability issues, and that was probably only making 550 horsepower at the time. And, but that was going back, now what's been 11 years, and it's amazing, in that much time, what we've been able to come up with from the perspective of making Subaru engines last and making Subaru engines reliable. And again, it's the total package. It's not just you got to build a super strong engine. You've got to have the right tuner. You've got to have the right parts to go along with that. You've got to have the right safety controls built into it. I mean, now we're on a season and a half now on Mike's engine. And that car's still going well. We inspect it all the time. Do kind of the standard things in terms of compression, leak down. We look at the oil, do oil analysis from time to time. Still going strong. So again, it's the total package of being able to do it, but it's keeping that reliability strong to, as you were saying, to allow them to turn laps is important.
Yeah, it's almost one of those things where I would say, maybe to kind of sum it up, if you're wanting to move in this direction and you have not gone out there and competed for a season or multiple seasons, that you almost want to start from a standpoint of reliability. Okay, get a car before you do anything to it. Make sure that you can drive a weekend and not really have to chase too many mechanical issues. Maybe 2 events in a row before you have to really do any kind of significant amount of work to the car, and that you can really trust the car and really focus on your driving. And it's like once you've got the reliability sorted, then you can start adding power, but you've always got to keep reliability as that priority as well.
Right.
So you're moving both the reliability and the power up equally, so that you're actually able to get out there and drive the thing, because that's what it's all about when it comes down to it. And
right. I mean, it's like
as a driver.
It's like talking about autocross back in the day. The single mod that you can do outside of seat time. Leaving seat time out of it, which is brutally important. The one mod that's worth the most time out on there in an autocross course is tires. More than anything else. I don't care how much power you have, what suspension mods you have. If you have crappy tires, you're going to go slow. The same thing applies to the track stuff as well. Focusing on the things that really don't have reliability concerns in order so that you can focus in on it as from a driver perspective, tires and brakes and suspension, all the things that make the car go around the track well, so that you can learn are vitally important and have little to no impact on overall reliability. And then start to add in power once you've gotten that far with it. And I think a lot of people just think like, oh, I need to have more power in order to go faster. And at some point that's true, but a lot of people don't have that mindset going in. And I think that's the wrong mindset to have ultimately.
Yeah, I think too many people have that mindset going in now, as opposed to, well, get a good set of brake pads, change your brake fluid, good set of tires, maybe a set of coilovers or a decent set of suspension, some poly bushings in there to get rid of your soft rubber ones, as opposed to just, well, let's go throw 450, 500 horsepower.
It's hard when you're looking at those cars. You look at all the cars that attract attention, especially from a track or a time attack perspective. The cars that are attracting attention are not the ones that are as you describe. I mean, they're the cars that have stickers all over them and have wraps and big wings and are making all kinds of loud turbo noises and have all the fancy parts on them. And those are the ones that grab the attention and create the emotion. So those are the ones that people want, because that's what they have fun with. I mean, that's what they want to emulate. Is those cars. They don't want to emulate these stockish cars that don't look like they have anything fun done to them.
You need to sell
show up and get
endurance seats as part of your I want to win package. I want to win. Okay, we're gonna give you 650 horsepower, but you just spend $5,000 sitting in this endurance car, and it's gonna be 90 horsepower Miata. And if you're not fast by this weekend, you need to figure out what.
I am the first person that will say you can learn more in an endurance race in a Miata than you can in probably 3 seasons of time attack.
Yeah,
sure.
You get out there for one session in my Miata, and I offer it to all the guys that we do time attack with. And I'm sure if you talk to Peter Zhang for any amount of time, he will start to talk about this Miata and endurance racing, because that is what he does. But anybody that we race with, I try to get them in that car, because they will learn so much about their deficiencies as a driver by spending hours in this car.
Mm-hmm.
You just can't get it doing time attack stuff.
And the data is super invaluable.
Yeah.
And if you're in a car that 3 other people are driving on the same day, or 2 other people driving on the same day, it's very much like, dude, this is what you could change. This is what you could do better. And even though driving like a spec Miata is not the same as driving a time attack Subaru, it does, you can get a feel of that finesse, like not too hard on the brakes, not too fast on the release, being easy on your turn in, being aggressive on your turn in, whatever.
And you can't make it up with power, because you don't have any.
Yeah.
Right.
Rolling, Scotty and I talk about that all the time. We're like, why are these damn BMWs beating us all the time? It's like, maybe we need to try rolling through these corners a lot faster.
Yeah.
And,
very true. That's very true. Yeah. And it was interesting. So Josh Halka, which I'm sure you guys know, he did a race with us down at Barber Motorsports Park last December, and it was his first wheel-to-wheel race that he did. And we were in the Miata, and Josh is used to going out there and being pretty competitive. Obviously, he's won his class in grid life for the last few years, and he's used to being at the top. And then we were going out there, and I think I was 3 seconds faster than him. My fastest lap to his fastest lap. And he's just looking at me. He's like, "How did you do that?" And I'm like, "A lot of seat time. I really know this car, and I spend a whole lot of time." And he's like, "I was really expecting to turn the fastest lap." And I'm like, "Gotta get out there and get more seat time, man. It's all about learning these cars, about learning cars in general, the finesse of them."
Yeah,
Well,
Josh is an interesting guy. I mean, he's a doctor, right? Like does some kind of or something. It's funny to take somebody in a mindset of like, okay, I went to school for this for like 7 to 10 years to do what I do. But then so many people like, well, I don't have enough time to get faster to do this, to do that. I'm going to go out and just do it this one way. Because, I mean, we talk about it all the time. There's this way to go faster. And like if you're looking explicitly at lap times, there's a lot of ways to achieve it, right? I mean, we've got a local shop who's got a car out there that is literally, I think they just have like a money pit outside. And they just like throw hundreds into this money pit in hopes that it'll go faster. And they're still struggling to keep up with some of the lower horsepower Subaru around here. And it's good to see him go into an endurance setting and be like, shit, okay, I need to spend more time on it. And you hear Josh talk about it too, you know, like, dude, yeah, that's the jam for sure.
He had a blast with it. He's actually one of the drivers for this weekend for Watkins Glen.
Awesome.
He had so much fun in it last year. He's like, I've got to do another one of these. And even though he's in, you know, a 125 horsepower, you know, Miata, he's just like, it's a blast. It's so much fun. It's such great experience to be out there by yourself for that long. I mean, what other opportunity do you get to just sit in a car and drive at race pace for 2 hours?
Yeah.
And then to be out there and experience the wheel-to-wheel competition side of it, to know, you know, oh, here's a car that maybe it makes more power, but I can keep up with them because, you know, the finesse of what I can do in this car from a handling perspective around the track. And to just constantly compare yourself so that once you have that experience, then you go back into, you know, he gets back into his Subaru and he goes out there and he's learned, you know, what it feels to really be at the limit, you know, to be worrying about, you know, 50% or 60% throttle versus in a Subaru where you may just, with 500 horsepower, may just be on and off throttle, you know, trying to get it through a corner.
Yeah.
It teaches you a level of control that you just otherwise it's just hard to learn in that time.
Yeah. And even the fact that there is that level of control that's out there versus using the throttle as an on-off switch.
Yeah, right.
And it's one of those, like, just doing laps, like there's seat time, you know, it's one of the importances is it's not just being in a car on the track. It's using the time in the car on the track and paying attention.
Right.
And when you're talking about an endurance race where you're going to be like an hour, 60 minutes on the track in the car in competition, you've got like a lot of repetition that you can pay close attention to details on the track, try things, figure out little changes that work, or maybe a little bit larger changes that work, or what doesn't work. And then you spend all of that time refining how you're driving the car around the track. And then at the end of that, you should have a much better, you know, a better lap time or be faster at the end than you did at the beginning. And then you compound that to doing that kind of racing over and over and over again. And then that's where you develop yourself as a driver.
Right. Yeah. One day, you know, in an endurance race is like 2 seasons in time attack.
Oh yeah. Totally.
I mean, would you say it's fair to say something to the extent, maybe this is overstating it slightly, but if you can't find the time in an endurance race on track for like an hour or 2 hours or over the course of an endurance race, if you can't find time, then you're never going to find it in a time attack setting where you only have a couple of laps, you know, a handful of laps even, to go out there and set your fastest time.
Yeah. I mean, I think it helps the mental game too, right? I mean, it gets you have 2 hours. It's like jogging. I always think of like endurance racing, like running. You go out on a jog and you're like, all right, I'm going to run for like 30 minutes today. And like that first 10 minutes, you're like, God, my sides are killing me. My shins hurt.
It sucks.
I'm like a herniated cow out here. And it's like, and then you kind of get in the groove of it. And I feel like for me, endurance racing is like that, but you don't get to do that in time attack. You're like, you have to like step out into your car with the mindset that I'm going to fucking blow this away.
I'm going to do it.
Like that's how it's got to go. And especially in grid life where traffic is just a mess. And so you get, so you take like a little bit of that solo. So if you're doing solo racing like autocross, where you come to a new track every single time, it's different every time, and you're trying to dissect each one of those little points every second that you're out there, because you're not out there for many seconds. And then you take this endurance racing where you're like, okay, I know I've learned what I can do and I can get into a groove. Let me try and blend those 2 ideas together where you have this like really badass package. And it's, I don't know, endurance racing is, and you shouldn't be going 10-10s all the time in endurance racing anyway. I mean,
Right.
You've got other drivers behind you that are in your team. You got tires and brakes, and I mean, depending on where we're at, it could be hours left in the race. So I mean, endurance racing is interesting because it strengthens your mind. So now when you go out jogging, you're ready to hit the pace, right off the bat.
Right.
And it's easy to kind of like get lazy in endurance racing. Like, oh shit, like why is this car catching me now? And so it helps that mental game so much.
Yeah, I mean, I shoot. I always joke around with the guys that are driving the car, and I say that I always shoot for 9.5 tenths.
Yeah.
That's my endurance pace. I mean, you never want to be that 10 tenths pace. That's the time attack pace, and that's what you're trying to run. But yeah, I mean, even getting into the physical fitness side of it, in order to run at that level, I started working out in order to be more fit for driving. It's something I never really had done before. And I was like, you know what? I need to focus on my physical fitness so that I can do this endurance racing. Because back in the day, 6 years ago or whatever, running that 350Z, that was beating me up. Trying to be out there for 2 hours at a time in that car was just killing me. My back, I mean, I'd come in barely be able to walk because my back would hurt so much. And I just wasn't physically able to handle the car for that long of a period of time. And it made a huge difference for me. And this has kind of changed from talking about the mechanics of Subarus into like, more of an overall sort of professional or amateur kind of driver skill sort of talk. But it helps a ton. I mean, all of that stuff. I mean, even now, I mean, I have a Model 3, the Tesla Model 3 that I've been campaigning the last, I guess, year and a half in time attack or grid life. More because I wanted to see what it was like to have an electric car and modify it and get out there and compete in it. And you want to talk about a car that you get one lap at a time. I mean, I literally have to do the easiest warm-up lap that is possible so that I don't kill the battery too much. And as well, the tires are really small for the weight of the car. So, I mean, I've got to go really, really easy on the car in the warm-up lap, and then you get one hot lap. That is it. You do not get a second hot lap. You get that one hot lap, and you got to get it done in that one hot lap. And if you don't, well, then you got to wait till the next session and hope that you do better. But, I mean, being able to hone in on your skills and be physically fit enough to know that when it's go time and you can actually go is important. And even like the night before, not going out drinking with your friends. Not being like, oh, that was this great day on track. I'm going to have 5, 6, 7 beers. I mean, even knowing that like I've got competition the next day, I need to make sure I'm prepared for it. I need to make sure I'm hydrating, even if it's only time attack. I mean, it goes such a long way to eating right, to being hydrated, to not, drinking too much the night before.
Yeah, Ryan, we're doing it all wrong then.
It's hard to do at a grid life event.
But
I mean, all of that is crucially important. I've got friends that are drivers that drive for IndyCar, that I've built cars for when they were younger. And that's still one of the things that they talk about so much. I mean, you look at the level of physical fitness that goes into these guys now. They don't drink, they only eat healthy stuff. That's like their entire life is dedicated to this racing. So at some level, make the most reliable car in the world. But if you're not physically prepared and mentally prepared as a driver to do it, I mean, you're not going to do it. You got to have to practice.
And I hate to say, well, as we're coming up on close to an hour, I mean, spoilers, but now, I mean, that's kind of the piece that I think is missed a lot when people take Subarus and turn them into race cars. Is that if you want to go out there and compete, really what it's all about, or what it should be all about, is you as the driver, your driving experience. And everybody gets the blinders on for the car. They think only about the car, and they forget about themselves as the driver. And it's
right. I mean,
you've
you
got
talk
to
about reliability. Ultimately, reliability is in some ways, in a lot of ways, you as the driver. Even looking. I mean, it takes certain things and certain mods and certain safeguards in order to keep an engine alive at that kind of power level. But are you as a driver doing what you need to do to make sure that you are not killing the car? As Ryan was saying, it's super easy to lose focus. In an endurance race, maintaining focus on what you're doing is critically important. And if you're not fit and in the right spot mentally to be able to maintain that focus, you're going to have a bad time. time attack, obviously we're shortening that stint dramatically, but you still have to remain hyper focused for that amount of time.
Yeah.
If you do something and you lose focus and you drive the car off track and you bend a shock, obviously then as a driver, you have then, specifically contributed to the lack of reliability of the car, and you've caused problems. So you need to make sure, yes, back at the shop, we do everything that we can to make sure that when the car gets out there, the car is good and you're not going to have any problems. The driver needs to make sure that they're doing everything that they can to make sure that they're not going to have any problems. Same way you take care of an engine, you got to take care of yourself.
Well, and even more, like, I'm thinking about brakes here. Like, one of the things that I think as novices, when you first start driving at the track, one of the things that you can really overuse is the brakes. Or a lot of people have a lot of problems with the brakes. But a lot of what it comes down to is it's like, well, you're going into that corner at 50, the car will go into that corner at 75. So you're shutting off all of this extra speed that you don't have to. You're putting all of that extra heat into the brakes that you really shouldn't have to. And you're doing that at like X number of corners all the way around the track. Like, that's why you can't get more than a lap before the brakes fade.
Right.
Even, and so in what we always, the easy thing that people look at is like, well, I need a big brake kit. I need a big brake kit. I need race pads. I need brake ducts, because these brakes just, I can't do more than a lap before they're just completely nuked. And it's like, well, you got to kind of bring that focus back to yourself too. And like, well, are you using the brakes? Are you overusing the brakes? Are you stopping the car, slowing the car way more than you really have to? And that's why you're nuking all these things.
So that's one of the things we've been working with Mike on. We put a Bosch Motorsports M5 system into the car. And on the Motec dash, we set up kind of a happy range of pressure so that he knows that if he's overslowing, or not specifically overslowing, but is he using the brakes efficiently? Is he using the brakes to optimal pressure? Or is he not hitting the brakes as hard as he thinks he is? Is he hitting the brakes too hard and just causing problems and locking them up? So we set up, lights on the dash. That's kind of a nice, happy, sort of purpley light. It's just a calming light. So when he is in that ideal pressure range of the braking system, these lights light up purple. And it's like enough that it's bright even in the daytime, so that he can see that, in his peripheral, that he is in the optimal, braking pressure. If he goes over that, it turns red, so that he knows he's exceeded that pressure. And then if he's under that optimal range, it doesn't light up at all. So that he can now drive to that pressure in the braking zone, so that he knows that he's using the brakes optimally. And that's helped him a lot go way deeper into corners now, because he knows that before he just wasn't hitting the brakes hard enough. I mean, he thought he was, but he wasn't. And it's about those driver aids. So now he can say, oh, I can carry another 100 feet into this corner. I didn't even realize that I could do it, because before I wasn't even hitting the brakes.
Right.
You get so lost as a driver, especially in a high horsepower car. You're going down the straight in a high horsepower car, and all you can think about is sitting there is like, oh, this braking zone's coming up. Here it comes. Am I going to make it or not? Because you're just thinking about the sensation of speed, especially if you have like a speedometer, which I never have a speedometer on a race car, because I don't want to know how fast I'm going in real time. I don't want to sit there and focus on that.
Okay.
And you just get so wound up in, I'm going so fast, I better brake her. And a lot of times the car is way more capable than you are from a driving perspective. You need to know what you're doing out there. So
yeah, it's all
to make it more fun. I am super pumped to hear about an 850 horsepower Subaru motor. That sounds freaking dope. And I want 2 of them, and I'll send you my address after we get off here. I am broke, and I don't have any money, so.
No problem. I'll ship one out today.
Nice.
We've got 2 turbos waiting here to go on the car, so just waiting on the turbine housings to show up.
Heck yeah, that's awesome.
Wow.
So, and that car is a pretty complete package as it is. So to go from 650 to 850, I mean, you've already sorted out so much stuff at that 650 range. So 850, I mean, it shouldn't introduce a whole lot. It shouldn't open up a new can of worms.
The biggest problem that we're going to have is the transmission at this point, because we can't run a sequential trans in that car because of the class rules. We can run a dog box H pattern. We haven't gone that far yet. Our problem is we keep blowing out 4th gear currently. So it's going to be a lot of torque management in order to not make too much torque in the mid-range. So it's going to definitely be some fun boost control in order to ramp it up to make the power up top, but to not overwhelm fourth gear, in the mid-range in order to strip it. I mean, at Putnam a couple weeks ago, killed fourth gear. Interestingly enough, he broke fourth gear. We didn't know he broke fourth gear when he was out there in the last session. Then he just started skipping fourth gear and went, did a 3-5 shift, ended up turning his fastest lap. And, so it was one of those he's like, do I really need fourth? He's like, 3rd to 5 is not much of a drop in RPM with this trans. I'm like, we'll figure that out. But yeah, I mean, the motor I think is built, the motor, it's got enough from an internal perspective, I think, to handle the power. And it's not like we're going to be making that power all the time. That's going to be for those specific tracks where we really need that power band. If we ever go back to Road America, we were down last year from Jackie Ding. We were down heavily from a top speed perspective on the back straight. A lot of that's aero, trying to do have a lot of aggressive aero components you're trying to push through the air. Also, Subarus are bricks. So, I mean, you're trying to put a giant hatchback brick through the air versus that Supra, which is far more streamlined than a hatchback Subaru. And that also prompted a lot of changes in the aero department this year. A lot of things that we changed over the winter that has made the car far more efficient. But yeah, for those kind of tracks, I mean, that's when we'll put that bigger turbo on there.
You got to get out to Dakota, man. Like, speed until you can break the speedometer with that much power.
We were working on the rules for global so that we got modified core supports. We were working on the rules so that we could get out there with and run at COTA at the beginning of the year. We got the rule book changed so that we could have modified core supports in that class. And then there was the whole rule about the not allowed to change the material of the body of the roof. And we have a carbon roof on the car. So then we were, again, outlawed for the class. So it's kind of shot.
Just come play in limited, man. It's going to be a good time no matter what. I tell you, it's an event and a track that is just for time attack anyway. It's so crazy.
Yeah.
I mean, I know Midwest Festival is crazy with all the people and all this stuff, but I mean,
the track isn't anything special.
Yeah, the track isn't anything special, but the amount of prep work that COTA puts into that track, even as the evenings after everything's winding down and stuff, I don't know, man. It's just it's really an unbelievable experience, and to have that much power would just be, I don't know, have you giddy. But you talk about aero and stuff. We talked with another one of our buddies, and I can't remember his name, with the GD, and I was telling him, I was like, that triple element rear wing, get rid of that thing. Do not bring that to COTA. That is not going to do you any help, because you need that between that front stretch and that back stretch. You need every mile per hour out of that thing if you really want to do some speeds.
We'll see if we can make it. I mean, that's always the goal every year, even if we run in a higher class of the car isn't truly prepped for. Last year, we had to send the car to Canada last year we ended up having a floor made for it. Really cool carbon Venturi floor that we had made for the car that the Alex up at Spage Sport did.
Wow.
But with the borders being kind of closed at the time because of COVID and trying to transport a car across, the borders, turned out to cause some problems, and the car kind of got stuck for a while. So we ended up missing the event as a result of some border issues. But
well, knock wood. Hopefully that is clearing up a little bit.
Hopefully, and hopefully it doesn't have to go back to Canada now. So I mean,
right.
Yeah, that's definitely on the schedule for sure to get down there. So
Nice.
I know he's really excited to drive it.
Yeah. Well, and there's a really good point that I want to underline here that you guys just made, kind of again back to building a super into race car, is that it's worth it sometimes, I think, to spend time at a certain power level. Make sure you're developing all the aspects of a car, because when you're talking about going from 650 to 850, you spent a lot of time at 650. You've learned a lot about the car. You've fixed a lot of issues at 650, and that's probably what's giving you the confidence to go up to 850, when the track demands it, when needed. But I would, there's a real value to spending that time and sorting the car out at, like the step that it's at, and getting completely comfortable with it before you look at adding anything else to it.
Yeah, I mean, the progression of the car is just that. I mean, it is a progression, and it's a matter of making small changes incrementally over time that you can verify actually produce results, that you can make sure you can keep running, whether it be power level or downforce or whatever the case may be. Continue to revise that so that you do prove that it is reliable, that it is working, and then make steps to then make it a little bit better. I mean, did the same thing with aero on the car. Started off with a very simple aero design on it. Showed that the aero was working. Showed that we could make little changes to the aero, whether it be splitter angle or wing angle or the rake and wedge in the car, and then figuring out, okay, all of this stuff helps. What's the next step? What do we need to do to revise this? Do we need a more advanced front splitter that can do more work, at the front end of the car?
Yeah.
And you do that, and then you're like, oh wow, we have so much more grip. Now let's revise the rear wing, and everything is just about small steps like that. It's about
the progression,
right? It's hard to make giant steps when you don't really know the platform, you don't know how it's going to take it, and then hope everything goes well. I mean, Ryan was talking about that shop that just keeps dumping money into a car and hoping that it's going to go fast. If you don't have the progression to understand how all these little changes are going to affect the car, and from a driving perspective, if you can't keep up with it, I mean, it's never going to go fast.
Yeah. I mean, you want to make a big step. Like there's the want to make a big improvement that you can feel a really big change, and that you shave multiple seconds off your lap time with the change. But I think that's another thing to just really keep in mind, is that that's not a lot of times making a big step like that. It's not reasonable to expect that you can, like, I'm going to get this triple element rear wing. I'm going to put it on the car, and seconds are just going to fall off the lap time. That's all that it's going to take. It's going to be perfect.
Right.
I don't care if this is half my racing budget for the year, this giant wing, but this is what I need. So that's what I'm going to do. Let's put it on there and just see. There's so much. It's such a better approach to do small steps in a progression and make little changes and verify the rationale at each step, at each iteration.
And especially from time attack, in that perspective, so much of it is theoretical. It's not like we have a budget here at the shop where we're putting the car into wind tunnels all the time and we're measuring it, and we have a team of engineers who are sitting there running the numbers to say, yes, it's going to work out exactly as you think. A lot of what we're doing is theoretical. If you just start throwing money at big parts, expecting everything to go well, I mean, it's not going to go well. You've got to learn to walk, before you can run.
Sure.
And it's kind of the same thing. I mean, you've got to approach it slowly until you figure out what it is that you're doing. That's one of the reasons why spec racing can be so much fun. I mean, there's still so much to learn in spec racing, but you're taking a formula and you're given that formula, and you have to work within the confines of that formula to say that this is the only thing you can do to the car. Then it's all down to setup and driving. But in time attack, you're so unlimited in what you can do and how you do it to a car, that you're taking the driving and what you have to do in the driving, you're taking the setup and what you have to do in the setup, and then you're taking the modifications and the overall platform of the car, and you've got to put that in there as well. I mean, it's it throws a lot into the car. Throws a lot of knowledge at it that you have to try to grasp and understand.
Well, and the other thing is, like, that you have to keep in mind that I think is easy to overlook is you might guess wrong. Like, you
all the time.
Yeah, hey, I'm gonna put this giant rear wing on. If you just spent this giant chunk of your budget and you put this giant rear wing on and it makes it worse, or like all of a sudden, like one of the first things when we put a big rear wing on a race car, we realized is, well, now it's completely washing out the front of the car because we didn't have a built front splitter on the car.
Yep.
Like, oh, okay, well, this is a little bit of an improvement, but we can't even utilize it. We had to completely take all of the angle of attack out of the rear wing, because even just a little bit of angle of attack, and like on the high speed sweepers, the front end just washed out.
Yep.
It's like you're gonna get stuff wrong too, and like that's where the small steps are important, because if you make a wrong step, but it's a little wrong step, one, you know what the small change is that you made, but two, you realize what what direction it went in the wrong way. Can you correct it, or is there another small step, like in another aspect of the car, that you could use to balance it and like get it balanced again and that sort of thing?
And sometimes it's important to make a big jump.
Right.
You talk to anybody who has done this long enough, or especially autocrossers. They're always trying to dial in that perfect tire pressure. And sometimes, I mean, you can try to sneak up on it, and you're like, all right, I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a session. I'm going to come back and I'm going to change I think I need to go down 1 PSI in the rear of my tire pressure in order to get it right. Sometimes it doesn't work. Sometimes you have to make a big jump, but an educated guess at that big jump to say, I think I actually need to go down 6 PSI because I'm way over my target. And only in doing that big jump do you then understand the gross effect that it's had on the car to say, oh, well, no, that definitely wasn't it. I completely overshot that. I really need to go up, but until you made that big jump, using that sort of educated guess, sometimes you just missed it and it's hard to sneak up on it. So that's where a lot of it comes down to experience and calling upon that experience to know what to do in order to make the car actually better. And the only way you get that is by going out and trying it and doing it.
Testing.
Yeah. Got to test.
It's fun. Like another thing that I think is kind of exciting about just the US tracks and like the grid life for the global time attack schedule and stuff is how much variation there is in the tracks. Like technically your power and aero package you'd have for NCM wouldn't be the same aero package and power package that you could get away with or use at Road America, and like I just think about if you had 850 horsepower at NCM, that would just be like that much further you'd make it through an Armco barrier because it's really where on that track where you could really use that much power. But man, you can really crank down on the aero and start getting those like aero benefits through, rolling speed through those corners. But you go to Road America and now it's like 850 horsepower through like 3 big massive straight stretches. Dial some of that air, just enough aero to get through turn 3 or just through whatever, it's like, yeah, I don't know. It's cool. And I think about my setup, like my current aero setup as being as modular as possible. Can I take this away? Can I add this? Can I do it at the track? Can I make it as quick and as easy as possible? Because, my limiting factor is going to be power. So we're going to be changing all these other little things. And I don't know. I think it's a pretty cool like scenario. I can think about my buddy with that big wing. He's building it for like what ends up being a real narrow scope. You're like, cool, it's going to be fast here. I was like, that's cool. But like, what about when you want to show people how badass you are there?
Yeah.
Like,
where else do you drive?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's a great point because, I mean, the tracks that we go to vary heavily and you need to be able to set the car up well. And that's probably why, some cars do better at some tracks than others because they don't adapt as well. And that's probably also why you see a lot of consistency in the lower classes where you can't really do much to the cars because you don't have the ability to adjust. They're going to be more consistent from track to track, especially when aero starts to come into the game. I mean, the back straight of Road Atlanta. I mean, you're going to approach it far differently than you would Gingerman.
Yeah.
And you've got to set the car up properly for it. Mike was talking about it. We were talking yesterday about, he's like, it'd be really nice to have that big horsepower package for Midwest. And I'm like, it's not going to help you much at Gingerman. Like there is a straight, but I mean, like it's just going to be a nightmare the rest of the time trying to get the thing to spool and trying to do it. Like, let's crank the aero up and for the first, 9 turns, let's carry some serious speed through those first 9 turns. That's really where we can gain a lot of lap time. So
for sure,
you got to be able to adapt.
And there's a lot to it. There's a lot of these aspects. You just kind of have to get out there and drive at these different tracks, find out what works at one track versus another, and start try like not even making changes to the car in iteration, but like going to different tracks in iteration. Like, okay, what is working here? What isn't working there? Is it something that can be changed? Is it not something that can easily be changed?
Yep.
Man.
See time and data.
Yeah. Well, yeah, it all comes down to that, doesn't it?
Yep.
Well, Tony, we've taken a lot of your time. Want to thank you again here as we're winding down for making the time and chat with us. Really appreciate it again.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
Before we just close out, Scotty, Dussex, any last questions you have for Tony?
Quick question: Are you doing the 2+2 block for Mike's car?
Mike's is actually a 234 D-stroker.
Right.
Okay.
So we used to run the 2.5 in his, and then we switched over to the 4 millimeter rod setup with 2 liter crank dimensions. I definitely prefer that block configuration from a geometry perspective for track guys. It just seems to make the rod bearings a lot happier in the long run.
Gotcha.
You never have to worry about blowing pistons out in these kind of motors, just because you're running on in his we run a very specific blend of ethanol that we buy in drums, so we know that the fuel quality is very good. We don't have to worry much about detonation. Again, that's all in the tuner and the electronics package, making sure that stays within check and is all working properly. From here, then it's just a matter of spinning the motor over that many RPM, and to that high of RPM, what can you do to make the rod bearings last longer? Heat management is big, proper oil pressure and oiling system, and then being able to change the rod ratio in a way in which it can do a little bit less work is helpful.
We had a whole conversation. That's when we got Clint on. We had Clint and Micah, and that's what we talked about was the long rods. And I think towards the end of that conversation, we talked about the plus 4 millimeter possibility of a Subaru engine versus just a plus 2.
Yeah, the plus 4s are awesome. There's some good configurations out there for sure, but there's definitely some that lend themselves better to track use. Sure.
Dussex, any last minute questions or thoughts?
Last minute thought. I really love Peter Zhang. I just don't know Mike over like or dislike him. It probably feels like I'm picking on him. I'm really not, but yeah, I mean, Peter's just got so much good energy. Every time I run to him, it's like you've known him for years. And when I had my fire at Gingerman in 2020, I know he had problems too, and we kind of felt like brothers in arms, And then I ran into him again at NCM last year, and I don't know. He's just like he represents Turning Concepts so well. He's just like a great dude, and I can't think of, like, you talk about how much the family side of being and Time Attack is. And man, Peter, for me, he's one of my favorite people on Time Attack. So super cool.
Nice.
Peter and I have, we talk all the time. The real struggle with him is trying not to have those conversations go over 27 minutes. And if you ever ask him sometimes, he's got a hard limit at 27 minutes that if I hit 27 minutes on the phone call, I'm allowed to hang up on him because I have other things that I have to do. So he knows that is his limit. He tries to get all of his conversation out by that 27-minute time limit. So
that must be why it's so fast to me. But I don't know. People who know me know that I am long-winded as well. So that must be why me and Peter.
Guys can spread or spin some yarns.
Peter's new car that we're working on, which should be out testing hopefully within about a month or so, should be a whole lot of fun. I think he's gonna have a blast.
I'm excited.
It's awesome. Something to stay tuned for.
Yeah, that's gonna be cool.
Very cool. Well, Tony, thanks once again. Thanks for chatting with us and having a great conversation. Tony, again, from Turning Concepts, to anybody that wants to go out there and check out more about what they're doing. And at the end, I will just say, once again, thanks to everybody for listening. Thanks for your support. And as always, until next time, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning. Thanks, everyone, for tuning in to the Flatirons Syndicate Motorsports Podcast. Once again, we'd like to let you know that your support is what makes this show possible. Be sure to check out our online store at flatirons.com for any of your aftermarket or OEM Subaru parts needs. And as always, stay tuned with Flatirons Tuning.